A millionaire is saved by a poor woman and repays her by giving her a job. A few days later, he is shocked to see her in a newspaper article. Christian Butler didn't appear as someone who would venture through a dimly lit alley. He lived in the world's polished corners, surrounded by sleek high-rises and impeccable suits. At 40, his years had graced him with a quiet kind of power, one that was never shouted, but always felt. As a successful businessman, Christian had long traded the noise of a chaotic world for the muted hum of well-ordered offices and boardrooms, where everything fell into place with methodical precision. Tonight, however, he wasn't in his usual territory. A charity gala, full of self-congratulatory clinks of champagne glasses and polite smiles, had ended early for him. He had never quite fit in with the glittering crowd, despite his title, despite the wealth. Tonight, there was something about the surface pleasantries that had worn him thin, so he slipped away, his steps echoing against the brick walls of the alley. The remnants of an autumn rain thickened the air, with a cold mist clinging to the city like a protective layer. As he strolled, his thoughts strayed to the contracts he had previously signed, the calls awaiting his attention on his desk, and the burden of responsibilities bearing down upon him. He wasn't paying much attention to the sounds around him. That was, until 3 figures appeared from the shadows. Christian didn't even register the shift in atmosphere until it was too late. They had moved in quickly, surrounding him, their bodies blocking any escape. One of them, a tall, wiry man with a cruel grin, stepped forward. The others stood still, their faces obscured, but their intent clear in the way they gripped their weapons. A knife glinted faintly under the streetlight, a glimmer of malice. "Wallet," the man said, his voice raspy. "Now." Christian's eyes flickered to his surroundings, calculating the distance to the nearest exit. There was no time. His hand moved instinctively to his side, but before he could even get his bearings, the man's hand shot out to grab him by the collar. Christian was a man accustomed to control, over people, over situations, over himself. But here, in this narrow, damp alley, he felt the familiar weight of vulnerability settle in his chest. He wasn't afraid. He was irritated. "I don't think you understand," he said quietly, his voice as icy as steel. "This is a mistake." The thug didn't flinch, but something shifted in his posture. He had heard that tone before, heard it in the boardroom, in the meetings where billionaires clashed. It was the voice of a man who could afford to lose a little, but not too much. Just as the thug raised his hand to strike, a flash of movement caught Christian's eye, a blur in the dark. From the corner of his vision, a figure stepped out of the shadows. The woman approached them with ferocity. She was slight, but there was an air about her, like someone who had lived through something more dangerous than a street fight. A metal rod was gripped tightly in her hand, her knuckles white with the force of it. Without hesitation, she swung it, knocking the knife from one of the attacker's hands and sending the thug stumbling back. The others hesitated, unsure, giving her the opening to strike again. Swift, precise, efficient. The thugs, realizing they had miscalculated, scrambled more out of instinct than strategy, and soon they disappeared back into the shadows as quickly as they had come. Christian stood frozen for a moment, still processing the scene. She was standing there now, her breathing steady but controlled. Her eyes never left the alley, scanning for any sign of a threat, her posture ready for more. The sound of his heartbeat was louder than the rain as he watched her. She didn't flinch, didn't seem surprised by what had just unfolded. "Thanks," Christian said, his voice breaking through the silence. He didn't know what else to say, but the words felt like the right ones. He took a slow step toward her, instinctively reaching for his wallet, pulling out a few bills. "You saved my life," he added, offering her the money. She looked at it for a moment, her expression unreadable. "I don't need charity," she replied, her voice low, a touch of something guarded in her tone. Christian nodded, a flicker of something, curiosity perhaps, passing through his mind. Then, "What do you need?" he asked, the words almost sounding foreign to him. It was the kind of question he rarely asked anyone. But there was something about this woman, something he couldn't quite place. She looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head. "A new life," she said simply. She didn't offer an explanation, nor did she wait for a response. Instead, she turned and walked away, her figure swallowed by the mist of the alley. Christian stood there for a moment longer, staring at the space where she had been. Then, as if pulled by some unseen force, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card, writing a quick note on the back. "If you ever change your mind," he said, more to the air than to her retreating form, "give me a call." He slipped the card into his jacket pocket, turning slowly to leave the alley. His thoughts were still with her, with the strange, powerful aura she carried. And as he walked back into the world he knew, Christian Butler couldn't help but feel that his life had just been quietly, but irrevocably, changed. Ashley strolled through the city streets, her steps deliberate and unhurried, as if the concrete beneath her feet could crumble at any moment, engulfing the past. The city, with its sharp angles and cold glass, felt like a world she didn't belong to anymore, one of polished surfaces and lives lived in silence. Her eyes, dark and distant, skimmed over the people rushing around her. Their lives flowed in predictable currents, while hers had fractured into 1,000 scattered pieces, each sharp and jagged. She could still remember the days when she walked with ease in a world of wealth and comfort, where her father's name carried weight and doors opened with a simple nod. But that was before the bankruptcy, before the fall. Ashley's fingers brushed the edges of her coat as she passed a row of glass storefronts, the reflection of a woman she didn't recognize staring back at her. Her hair, once carefully styled and kept in place, now hung loosely, framing a face marked by time and hardship. She was different now, not the carefree woman who had once attended gala events and received praise for her father's accomplishments. Her father, Albert Shelton, was a visionary, until his vision faltered. Ashley's steps slowed as the memory flooded back. The day the financial reports arrived, their empire crumbling under the weight of poor decisions, poor investments, and the cruel unpredictability of the market. She could still hear his voice that night, the trembling edge as he tried to hide his panic. She had told him everything would be fine, that they'd fix it, but they didn't. Her father had fought to maintain appearances even as his health deteriorated. Ashley had watched helplessly as his strength slipped away, leaving behind a hollow man who, for all his success, could not escape the unforgiving nature of a collapsing empire. The day he died in that sterile hospital room, his last breath barely making a sound, was the day everything truly ended. Ashley stopped walking and leaned against the cool stone of a nearby building. Her gaze turned inward, the sharp edges of those memories sinking deeper. The death of her father, followed by the unraveling of their world, had left her adrift in a world where she had once held all the answers, but now found only questions. The wind swept through the streets, carrying with it the sound of hurried footsteps and distant voices, but Ashley stood still, lost in her thoughts. The world had moved on. She had not. 2 days passed before Ashley did something she hadn't thought she'd be capable of. It was late afternoon when she found herself in front of a small, nondescript payphone on a corner, its metallic surface catching the dim light of the street lamps. She had walked by this same corner countless times, but today it was different. Today she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the card Christian Butler had given her. Her fingers hesitated over the number, the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. Was she really going to do this? Could she walk into his world, a world so different from her own, and leave behind the ruins of her past. Her eyes scanned the card again, and for a moment she considered throwing it away. But something stopped her. A part of her, no matter how small, still clung to the idea of a fresh start, of rebuilding something from the broken pieces of her life. With a sharp breath, Ashley dialed the number. Christian was sitting at his desk when the phone rang. It was a familiar sound, one that had often marked the beginning of another long stretch of meetings, calls, and deals that never seemed to end. But tonight, the phone felt different. He picked it up, without hesitation, his fingers moving with the kind of precision that came from years of habit. "Christian Butler," he said, his voice cool but curious. "Mr. Butler," came the voice on the other end. It was quiet, steady. He could hear the faint hum of city life in the background, but there was something in the voice that intrigued him, a quiet strength, tempered by something deeper. "This is Ashley." Christian sat back in his chair, the name falling over him like a weight. Ashley, the woman from the alley. He didn't say anything at first, just let the silence stretch between them. She seemed to be waiting for him to speak, as if unsure of what came next. I'm sorry for calling you," Ashley continued, her words deliberate. "But I need a job, something that might give me a fresh start. I don't expect anything special, just something that could help me begin again." Christian was quiet for a moment longer, his eyes drifting to the window. The city outside seemed a million miles away. "I'll meet you tomorrow," he said simply, then added, almost as an afterthought, "Come to my office at 10. He hung up the phone, his fingers lingering on the receiver for a moment longer than necessary. Ashley. She had a certain quiet gravity to her, an unspoken weight that made him curious, even more so than when he had first met her. For a moment, Christian sat still, considering the conversation. He wasn't the kind of man who got involved in the personal lives of others, especially not in the way she seemed to be asking. But there was something about her, a flicker of resilience beneath the surface. Something about her, he thought, would change the course of things to come. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Ashley stepped into the gleaming marble lobby of Christian Butler's office building. She paused just inside, feeling the weight of the space, its polished floors reflecting the cold light from the sleek, minimalistic chandeliers above. The contrast between the luxury surrounding her and the life she had left behind was almost unbearable. She had been in grand buildings before, when she was someone else, someone who hadn't known what it felt like to lose everything. Now, the familiar chill of a professional world was all too alien. Every surface screamed power, success, and wealth. And here she was, standing in the heart of it, trying to figure out how to navigate a world she had no place in anymore. Her first day was a challenging experience. The second she stepped into Christian's office, she was met with raised eyebrows and whispered remarks. The assistants who'd been there longer sized her up with cold curiosity. Ashley remained quiet, her face a mask of indifference. She could feel their eyes on her, but she didn't flinch. Let them judge, she thought. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the job and the quiet promise she had made to herself when she decided to take the first step out of the shadows. A fresh start, a chance to rebuild. She would prove herself, even if the world didn't believe she belonged. Her desk was tucked away in a corner of the office, small and unassuming. The hum of phones ringing and the murmur of conversations faded as she focused on the tasks ahead. Reports, emails, schedules. Ashley threw herself into the work, her mind moving faster than her hands could keep up. Her skills were sharp. She had been trained to handle every kind of business crisis. She had seen it all, managed it all. But here, in this world, she was a newcomer, a stranger in a suit. At first, no one spoke to her. The others kept their distance, unsure of how to treat the mysterious woman who had appeared from nowhere, someone whose past was whispered about but never fully acknowledged. They didn't know her, didn't care to. But Ashley didn't mind. She was used to being invisible, to blending into the background, to not needing to be seen. And yet, as the day wore on, something shifted. A quiet acknowledgement, almost imperceptible, began to take root. Her work was self-evident. Ashley possessed a unique ability to manipulate numbers and analyze and process information. She had an intuitive grasp of problems before they even reached the table, and she found ways to solve them with a clarity that surprised even herself. When Christian walked into the office that afternoon, he glanced over the pile of work Ashley had already tackled, scanning through the reports she'd organized with precision. He had expected a slow start, a learning curve, but the desk in front of him was neat and efficient. "Impressive," he said, his voice carrying just enough weight to let her know he noticed. Ashley didn't look up, but the subtle nod she gave in acknowledgement was enough. No words were needed. She wasn't here to impress. She wasn't here to be anything other than what she was, a professional, competent, and maybe a little distant, and that was exactly how she wanted it. As the day turned into evening, she found herself retreating back into the shell she had perfected over the years. Her cold demeanor, detached, distant, was the armor she had come to rely on. She wasn't here to make friends. She wasn't here to win anyone over. The world had taught her that emotions were liabilities, so she kept them locked away, buried under the calm exterior she wore so well. Back in her small, nondescript apartment that night, Ashley sat by the window, staring at the city lights below. It was the same view she had grown used to, the same dim reflection of her own face staring back at her from the glass. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. "Stephen." She slid her finger across the screen and the message popped up. "How did it go?" She leaned back, tapping out her reply. "I'm in. I'll report tomorrow." There was a long pause before the next message came through. "Keep it together. Remember why you're there." Ashley's lips pressed into a thin line. She could almost hear the coldness in her brother's voice. He had always been the strategic one, the one who understood the broader picture, and to him, this wasn't just about getting a job. It was a step in a much larger plan. One that involved Christian Butler, one that involved revenge. Ashley had her doubts. She didn't want to play this game anymore. She refused to play a role in her brother's ambitious plan. However, she was aware of the potential consequences. She couldn't back down now. With a soft sigh, Ashley set the phone down and stared at her reflection once more. This was the beginning. She didn't know how long it would take or what the cost would be. But she had made a choice, and she would see it through, for better or worse. And as the hours stretched on, she allowed herself to wonder, just for a moment, what it might be like to escape the chains of her past, to build something for herself that didn't have the shadow of her family's ruin hanging over it. But even as the thought crossed her mind, she knew it was a fleeting fantasy. Her brother's voice echoed in her head again. Keep it together. She had no choice but to. Ashley settled into the rhythm of the office far quicker than anyone anticipated. Over the coming weeks, her meticulous nature started to emerge. The once suspicious glances from co-workers softened into quiet nods of respect as they realized she was more than just competent. She was exceptional. Problems that seemed tangled in bureaucracy or overwhelmed by urgency were swiftly dismantled under her hands. Ashley's work didn't just fix issues, it streamlined operations, often revealing oversights that others had missed. Christian noticed. Although he rarely gave praise, The efficiency Ashley brought to his office made him reconsider. She had an innate ability to see through the noise, cutting straight to the core of any issue. It started with small things. One evening, Christian was buried under a stack of files, deadlines bearing down on him. He had only mentioned the upcoming quarterly report in passing, not expecting anyone to anticipate the preparation needed. Yet there it was, neatly organized on his desk before he even asked. "Where did this come from?" he asked, looking up to see Ashley standing in the doorway. She had a clipboard in one hand, a pen in the other, her expression calm but focused. "You mentioned it during the meeting yesterday," she said simply. "I thought you'd need it ready by today." Christian studied her for a moment, nodding slowly. "I didn't expect you to handle this so quickly. Nicely done." Her response was nothing more than a polite nod before she returned to her desk. But later that evening, as Christian reviewed the report, he couldn't help but notice how detailed it was, more thorough than anything his previous assistants had ever prepared. It wasn't just efficient, it was insightful. Ashley sat at her desk that night, staring blankly at her computer screen. Her mind wasn't on the spreadsheets or emails. It was on the growing unease in her chest. She had begun to understand Christian in ways she hadn't expected. He wasn't the cold, ruthless businessman her brother had described. There was a sharpness to him, yes, but it was tempered with thoughtfulness. He occasionally displayed quiet compassion in subtle, unspoken ways. She hated herself for noticing. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. Stephen's name lit up the screen. Ashley hesitated for a moment before answering. "How's it going?" Stephen's voice was clipped, all business. "It's fine," she replied. "He trusts me more every day." "Good, keep at it. We need to get closer to him, to his decision-making, his vulnerabilities." Stephen's words were precise and methodical, as if he were describing a chessboard rather than their lives. Ashley swallowed hard. "I'm doing what I can." "Don't lose focus," he warned. "This isn't just about you, it's about Dad, about what he did to us." Her jaw tightened. "I know, Stephen." The line went silent for a moment before he spoke again, softer this time. "You're the only one who can do this. I'm counting on you." Ashley ended the call and set the phone down, her fingers trembling slightly. Stephen's words always carried weight, but tonight they felt heavier than usual. She stared at the darkened office around her, the hum of the building's air conditioning the only sound. The next day, Christian called Ashley into his office. She walked in, her usual composed expression firmly in place. "I need your thoughts on this," Christian said, sliding a document across the desk. His tone was casual, but the weight of the words wasn't lost on her. He wasn't asking her to execute a task. He was asking for her opinion. Ashley hesitated, taking the paper. She skimmed through it, her mind quickly breaking down the proposal into manageable pieces. When she looked up, Christian was watching her, his gaze steady but unreadable. "I'd adjust the timeline," she said finally. "The projections seem overly optimistic, and if the supplier can't keep up, it'll set the entire rollout back by months. Better to build in a margin of error now than deal with delays later." Christian leaned back in his chair, considering her words. "That's a good point," he said, a note of surprise in his voice. "I didn't think of that." Ashley placed the document back on his desk. "You shouldn't just rely on the numbers they give you. They always skew them in their favor." Christian smiled faintly. "Noted." As she left his office, Ashley felt the familiar pull of doubt creeping in. Each time he trusted her judgment, each time he treated her with respect, the harder it became to reconcile the man she worked with and the man Stephen blamed for their father's downfall. That night, Ashley sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone. The message from Stephen was brief. "Progress?" She didn't answer right away. For the first time, she hesitated to report every detail. The plan was still intact. Her actions were deliberate, careful. But the growing trust between her and Christian had introduced a complication she hadn't anticipated. Finally, she typed out a response. "He trusts me." The reply came almost immediately. "Good. Don't let him distract you." Ashley set the phone down and leaned back against the headboard, closing her eyes. The boundaries between her mission and her reality were starting to blur. She had stepped into this with a clear purpose. But now, the lines felt more like quicksand, pulling her deeper into something she couldn't yet define. And as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that the man she was supposed to destroy might not be the monster she had been led to believe. The office was unusually quiet when Ashley found the discrepancy. She had stayed late again, the hum of her computer the only sound in the otherwise empty space. The financial report in front of her didn't sit right, its numbers too clean, too perfect. Her instincts kicked in. Something was wrong. Ashley leaned forward, scrutinizing the data. A series of minor inconsistencies caught her attention, small enough to slip by unnoticed, but glaring to someone with her eye for detail. Cross-referencing with older reports, she saw the pattern: inflated projections, disguised losses. If these figures made it to the investors' meeting, the company could face disastrous consequences. Her breath quickened. Her first impulse was to leave it, let the company sink itself. That would bring Stephen's plan one step closer to fruition. But another part of her resisted. It wasn't just Christian who would pay for this error. Hundreds of employees, their livelihoods tied to the company's stability, would suffer too. Gritting her teeth, she started working, correcting the errors and reformatting the report. She spent hours untangling the mess, her fingers swiftly moving across the keyboard. By the time she finished, the first hint of dawn was creeping into the sky. She emailed the corrected document to Christian with a brief note. Found some issues in the numbers. Corrected them. Please review before the meeting. She hesitated for a moment before hitting send, her chest tight with unease. Christian called her into his office later that morning, the report open on his desk. He didn't look angry. Instead, there was a flicker of something else in his eyes. Respect, maybe. "How did you catch this?" he asked, holding up the pages she had painstakingly fixed. Ashley crossed her arms, leaning slightly against the doorframe. "The numbers didn't add up," she said plainly. "It didn't feel right." Christian nodded slowly, his gaze shifting between her and the report. "You saved us from a significant problem. If this had gone through, it could have cost us everything. Investors would have pulled out." Ashley said nothing, letting his words hang in the air. He studied her for a moment longer, his expression thoughtful. "You have a good eye," he said finally, closing the folder. "Better than most people I've worked with. Thank you, Ashley." She gave a curt nod and turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Ashley," he said, softer this time. "You're good at this. Really good. Have you always worked in finance?" Her spine stiffened, but she kept her face impassive. "I've had experience," she replied vaguely, avoiding his gaze. He didn't press, but she could feel his curiosity lingering as she stepped out of the room. Back at her desk, her hands shook slightly as she typed an email. The walls she had built around herself felt thinner now, the cracks widening. That evening, Christian's curiosity overcame him. He sat in his office, his laptop open, scanning through employee records. Ashley's file was thin, barely anything beyond the basics. No previous employers, no listed references. It didn't add up. For someone so skilled, she had left remarkably little trace. He leaned back in his chair, staring out at the city lights. Who was Ashley? And what had brought her here? Meanwhile, Ashley sat in her apartment, her phone pressed to her ear. Stephen's voice came through the line, sharp and clipped as always. "You did what?" he snapped when she told him about the report. "I fixed it," she said evenly, though her grip on the phone tightened. "Why?" "That was an opportunity to let the company fall apart." "Because it wasn't just about Christian," she shot back, her voice rising slightly. "If that report had gone through, it would have hurt a lot of people. People who had nothing to do with what happened to us." Stephen was silent for a moment. Then his tone turned cold. "You're getting too close. Don't forget why you're there, Ashley. Don't let him manipulate you." Ashley closed her eyes, the weight of his words pressing down on her. "I haven't forgotten," she said quietly, though the doubt in her voice betrayed her. "Good," Stephen said, "because if you can't do this, I will. And I won't be as subtle." The line went dead, leaving Ashley alone in the silence. The next morning, Ashley arrived at the office to find a fresh cup of coffee on her desk. A small, folded note sat beside it. She opened it, her brow furrowing at the neat handwriting. "Thanks for having my back. Christian." She stared at the note for a long moment, her chest tightening. This wasn't part of the plan. She wasn't supposed to feel anything. Respect, admiration, guilt. And yet, here she was, caught between two worlds, her brother's mission on one side and Christian's growing trust on the other. As the day wore on, she caught Christian watching her from his office. His gaze wasn't scrutinizing. It was curious, almost searching. She pretended not to notice, keeping her focus on her work. But the tension between them was palpable, an unspoken question lingering in the air. Who was she, and how much longer could she keep her secrets? Christian's secretary, Claire, approached his office with a stack of files, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She had been discreetly assigned to look into Ashley's background. The request wasn't unusual. Christian often wanted a deeper understanding of his key employees. But this time, there was something different in his tone when he'd asked. As Claire sifted through databases, she stumbled across a grainy, years-old news article buried in the archives. The headline read, "Shelton Enterprises declares bankruptcy amid scandal." Below it was a photo of a young woman standing beside a middle-aged man. The resemblance was unmistakable. Ashley. The accompanying article vividly depicted how the Shelton family, once a prominent business dynasty in the city, collapsed due to a series of bad deals and scandals. Albert Shelton, the patriarch, had died shortly after, leaving behind a broken family. Claire's lips tightened as she printed the article and brought it to Christian's desk. Christian gazed at the article, the image of Ashley capturing his interest, akin to a misfitting puzzle piece. He read it twice, the details sinking in. Albert Shelton. Shelton Enterprises. Bankrupt. Scandal. And now, years later, Ashley was working here in his company, never mentioning her connection to that world. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Ashley's skill and intelligence made sense now. She'd grown up in this world, surrounded by the mechanics of wealth and business. But why hide it? Why keep her past so carefully veiled? That afternoon, Christian asked Ashley to meet him in his office. She entered cautiously, her composed mask firmly in place, but she immediately sensed something different in his demeanor. Christian held up the printed article without a word, placing it on the desk between them. Ashley froze, her gaze flickering over the headline. The air seemed to thicken, the weight of unspoken truths pressing down on the room. "Why didn't you tell me?" Christian asked, his voice calm but edged with curiosity. "That you're Albert Shelton's daughter." Ashley's throat tightened. She had spent so long running from this moment, from the inevitable exposure of who she really was. But there it was, staring her in the face. There was no use denying it. "Because it doesn't matter," she said finally, her tone flat. "It has nothing to do with who I am now." Christian studied her, his expression unreadable. "Doesn't matter. Your father established an empire, and you are currently employed by me, assuming the identity of another individual. That's not nothing." Her jaw clenched, but she refused to look away. "My father built an empire, yes, and then it fell apart. That's what matters." She took a sharp breath, her voice hardening. "Do you want to know why I didn't tell you? Because I'm not that girl anymore. That name means nothing now." Christian leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk. "Ashley, I'm not asking to judge you. I just want to understand. Why the secrecy?" For the first time, her composure cracked. She turned away, pacing toward the window. "Because it's easier to be someone else than to explain how everything fell apart," she said, her voice low. "Shelton Enterprises went bankrupt. My father... he didn't survive the collapse. And me? I was supposed to fix it. Marry some investor my father thought would save us. But I couldn't do it. So I left." Her words, raw and unfiltered, hung in the air like a confession. Christian sat back, his gaze softening as he processed her story. "I had no idea," he said, after a long silence. "Shelton Enterprises. It never even crossed my radar. I didn't know about the collapse, about your family. I had nothing to do with what happened to you." Ashley turned sharply, her eyes narrowing. "Of course you didn't," she said bitterly. "Why would you? You probably saw us as just another minor component in the puzzle. Another family, trying to survive in a game we were destined to lose." The bitterness in her voice stung more than Christian expected. He opened his mouth to respond, but she cut him off. "It doesn't matter now," she continued, her tone steely. "I'm here because I needed a fresh start. Not pity, not charity, just a chance." Christian nodded slowly, his respect for her deepening, despite the tension in the room. "You've earned that chance," he said quietly. "And I don't give out praise lightly." She stared at him, searching for any hint of condescension, but there was none. Just honesty. She hated that it softened her resolve. "How was your day? If it was peaceful, comment sunshine. If it was stormy and you needed some encouragement, comment rain. We'd love to send you some warm hugs." That night, Ashley called Stephen. Her hand shook as she held the phone to her ear. "He knows," she said before he could speak. "What do you mean he knows?" Stephen's voice was sharp, tinged with alarm. "He found out about Dad, about the company, everything." Stephen was silent for a long moment. "And?" "And nothing," she said, her voice trembling. "He doesn't know what we're planning. But Stephen, he didn't even know about Shelton Enterprises. He had nothing to do with it." "You're getting too close," Stephen snapped. "Don't let him twist this. He's part of the system that destroyed us, Ashley. Don't forget that." She didn't respond, the doubt gnawing at her. For the first time, she wondered if Stephen's plan was built on a foundation as unstable as their father's empire, and if Christian Butler was really the villain they had painted him to be. As she hung up the phone, Ashley stared out the window, the city lights blurring together in her vision. The lines between revenge and reality were becoming harder to define. Christian couldn't shake the unease that had settled over him since his confrontation with Ashley. Her words had cut deep, her bitterness palpable, but it wasn't the accusations that troubled him most. It was the unknown. The pieces of her story didn't fit together neatly. Something else was at play, and Christian couldn't leave it alone. Late that evening, he sat in his office, the dim glow of his laptop illuminating his face. The search wasn't straightforward, but he had built his company on understanding systems and finding what others overlooked. Shelton Enterprises had been small compared to his conglomerate, but its downfall rippled through the city's financial web. As Christian dug deeper, a familiar name surfaced in connection with the events surrounding the Shelton collapse: Russell Spencer. Russell had been with Christian's company for over a decade, working his way up to vice president. He was shrewd, ambitious, and good at his job. Also, Christian had always believed. However, the details in the reports caused concern. Russell had spearheaded acquisitions of smaller companies during a period when Christian was frequently out of the country on business. Some of those acquisitions, including dealings with Shelton Enterprises, seemed questionable now. Christian leaned back in his chair, the weight of realization settling over him. It wasn't just bad business luck that had destroyed Shelton Enterprises. It had been orchestrated by Russell. Using his position, Russell had exploited loopholes, manipulated contracts, and orchestrated a financial chokehold on the Shelton family's business to further his own goals. A cold anger coursed through Christian as he pieced it together. He had trusted Russell, given him the authority to act on his behalf, and in doing so had unknowingly enabled the destruction of a family. Ashley's family. The next morning, Christian called Russell into his office. The man entered confidently, his polished demeanor and easy smile firmly in place. "You wanted to see me, Christian," Russell said, settling into a chair without waiting for an invitation. Christian didn't waste time. "I've been looking into our acquisitions from a few years ago, particularly Shelton Enterprises. Care to explain why you personally oversaw that deal?" Russell's smile faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "It was a standard acquisition. The company was struggling, and we took advantage of an opportunity." "An opportunity?" Christian repeated, his voice cold. "You mean you orchestrated their collapse so we could buy their assets at a fraction of their value?" Russell's face hardened. "Business is business, Christian. You know how this works." Christian's hands clenched into fists under the desk. "I gave you authority to act in the company's best interest, not to destroy lives for personal gain." Russell shrugged, his indifference piercing Christian's anger like a blade. "It's not personal. It never is. The Sheltons weren't prepared for this market, and we capitalized. That's what we do." Christian stood, the intensity of his gaze silencing Russell's flippant tone. "Not like this. Not under my name." Russell's confidence wavered for the first time, but he held his ground. "You can't change the past, Christian. What's done is done. And let's not forget, this company benefited greatly from my actions." Christian's voice was steel. "At what cost?" Russell didn't answer, but the silence was damning. Later that evening, Ashley burst into Christian's office, her suppressed anger erupting. "You knew," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "You knew what happened to my family, and you still act like you're innocent." Christian looked up from his desk, his expression calm but tired. "I didn't know, Ashley. Not until now." She slammed her hands on the desk, leaning in close. "How convenient for you. Blame it on ignorance and walk away clean." "I'm not walking away," Christian said firmly. "I've been investigating. It wasn't me who orchestrated what happened to Shelton Enterprises. It was Russell. He used my company, my authority, to do it behind my back." Ashley froze, her breath catching. The fury in her eyes dimmed, replaced by confusion. "Russell," she repeated, her voice uncertain. Christian nodded. "He manipulated the system to serve his own interests. I trusted him, and he abused that trust. I didn't know, Ashley. But I know now, and I intend to make it right." She stepped back, her mind racing. The truth unraveled the carefully constructed narrative she and Stephen had clung to. For years, they had blamed Christian, made him the villain in their story. But now, "You expect me to believe that you had no idea," she said, though her voice lacked the conviction it had moments earlier. "I do," Christian said, "because it's the truth. And whether you believe me or not, I'm going to deal with Russell. This ends now." Ashley turned away, her emotions warring within her. Anger, doubt, guilt. It all swirled together, leaving her unsteady. For so long, she has wanted revenge. But now she wasn't sure who the target was anymore. That night, she called Stephen. "It wasn't him," she said quietly. "It was Russell." Christian didn't know. Stephen's voice was cold. "And you believe him?" "I don't know," Ashley admitted. "But he's acting on it. He's going after Russell." Stephen was silent for a moment before he spoke, his tone sharp. "Don't let this distract you. Christian Butler built the system that allowed Russell to thrive. He's not innocent, Ashley. Don't forget that." But as the call ended, Ashley couldn't shake the doubt gnawing at her. What if Christian wasn't the monster she had been led to believe? And if he wasn't, where did that leave her? Where did it leave them all? Ashley was halfway through organizing a stack of documents when the knock came. It wasn't from Christian's office, it was at the front door of her apartment. The sound startled her. No one ever came here. Her heart quickened as she approached cautiously. Peering through the peephole, she froze. Stephen. She opened the door slowly, a mixture of surprise and unease rippling through her. "What are you doing here?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Stephen stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his tall frame filling the cramped space. His sharp eyes scanned the room as if assessing how far she had fallen from their once lofty life. He looked out of place here in his tailored coat and polished shoes, a stark reminder of their old world. "I needed to see you," he said curtly, his tone devoid of pleasantries. "We need to talk." Ashley closed the door behind him, crossing her arms. "I told you. Everything over the phone. What else is there to say?" Stephen turned to face her, his expression hard. "You're slipping, Ashley. You're allowing him to penetrate your innermost feelings." Her jaw tightened. "It's not that simple, isn't it?" he shot back. "The man built a company that allowed Russell to ruin us. Whether he knew it or not doesn't change the fact that he benefited from our destruction. And now, instead of finishing what we started, you're letting yourself believe he's some kind of hero." Ashley's hands clenched into fists. "You don't know him. He's not what we thought." Stephen's laugh was bitter, his eyes narrowing. "You think he's innocent? Let me tell you something, Ashley. Men like Christian Butler don't get where they are by playing fair. Even if he didn't know about Russell, he's complicit in the system that destroyed Dad. You cannot absolve him of responsibility." She turned away, her voice shaking with frustration. "He's trying to fix it, Stephen. He's gathering evidence against Russell. He's risking his company to expose the truth." "And you believe him?" Stephen's voice softened, but the doubt in his tone cut deep. "Or is this about something else? Have you forgotten why you're here?" Ashley whipped around, her eyes blazing. "Of course I haven't forgotten. Every single day I remember what happened to Dad, to us. However, this situation isn't entirely clear-cut, Stephen. Maybe it never was." Stephen stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, almost menacing tone. "Don't let your emotions cloud your judgment. Christian Butler is not your ally. He serves as a tool to achieve a specific goal. Remember that." Ashley met his gaze, her resolve wavering. She hated the doubt creeping into her mind, hated that she didn't have a clear answer anymore. Stephen's words were sharp and unwavering, but for the first time, she wasn't sure he was right. Meanwhile, Christian sat in his office, staring at the stack of evidence he had gathered. Each document served as a crucial component, illuminating Russell's G. Shelton and manipulation. But the path forward wasn't clear. If he exposed Russell, the fallout would be immense. Investors would panic, clients would pull out, and his company's reputation would take a massive hit. It wasn't just about the bottom line. It was about the people who worked here, who relied on the stability of his business to provide for their families. And yet, the alternative was unthinkable. Allowing Russell to remain in power would be a betrayal of everything Christian stood for. He had built this company on integrity, or so he had believed. Now, he saw the cracks in that foundation, and he couldn't ignore them. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. The decision felt impossible, but he knew what he had to do. Justice couldn't come without cost. If he wanted to make things right, for Ashley, for her family, he had to take the risk. The next morning, Christian called Ashley into his office. She entered cautiously, the tension between them palpable. "I've made my decision," Christian said, his voice steady. "I'm going to expose Russell. I've already started compiling the evidence. Once I have enough, I'll bring it to the board." Ashley studied him, searching his face for any sign of hesitation. She found none. "You'll risk everything," she said quietly. Christian nodded. "I know, but it's the right thing to do." Her chest tightened at his words. For so long, she had wanted to believe he was the villain in her story. But standing here, hearing the conviction in his voice, she couldn't deny the truth anymore. He wasn't the monster she had imagined. "Then do it," she said finally. "Expose him. Even if it costs you everything, it's the only way to fix this." Christian's gaze softened. "Thank you, Ashley. I needed to hear that." That evening, Ashley sat in her apartment, staring at her phone. Stephen's name glared back at her, but she didn't call him. She couldn't. For the first time, she felt like the plan wasn't just slipping away. It was unraveling entirely. Stephen wasn't wrong. The system that had destroyed their family was real, and Christian had benefited from it, whether knowingly or not. But he wasn't the enemy she had been fighting. And if he wasn't the villain, then what was she doing here? Her phone buzzed suddenly, and she flinched. A message from Stephen. "I'm not waiting much longer. Get it done." Ashley set the phone down, her hands trembling. She was running out of time, out of excuses, and out of reasons to continue the path they had started together. And as the night stretched on, she found herself wondering if redemption was possible. For Christian, for her, and for the fragile, fractured trust between them. The morning air in Christian's office was thick with tension as Russell entered. He carried his usual air of confidence, but Christian's piercing gaze caused him to falter slightly. The desk between them was cluttered with papers, evidence Christian had been collecting for weeks. Russell closed the door behind him and smirked, a thin, calculated expression. "You wanted to see me, Christian?" Christian leaned back in his chair, the air around him cold and controlled. "Sit down," he said, his voice even. Russell complied, his gaze briefly darting to the stack of documents. "What's this about?" Christian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slid a folder across the desk. "Read." Russell flipped it open, his smirk fading as his eyes scanned the pages. Financial records, contracts, correspondences. Each piece of evidence meticulously detailed his actions over the years. The acquisitions, the underhanded deals, the ruin of companies like Shelton Enterprises, all laid bare. When Russell finally looked up, his expression was unreadable. "This is quite the presentation," he said, forcing a laugh. "But what exactly are you accusing me of?" "Don't play dumb," Christian snapped, his voice rising for the first time. "You used this company as a weapon, exploiting smaller businesses, destroying lives. all while lining your own pockets. Russell leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. If you're trying to paint me as the villain, Christian, remember who signed off on my authority. I didn't do this alone. You were complicit, whether you knew it or not. Christian's jaw tightened. Don't twist this. I trusted you to act in the company's best interest, not to turn it into your personal empire. Business is cutthroat, Russell said, shrugging. I did what needed to be done, and let's not pretend the company didn't benefit. At what cost? Christian demanded. Shelton Enterprises was just one of many. Families were destroyed because of your G. Shelton. Russell's smirk returned, more dangerous now. If you expose me, you will also be exposing yourself. Do you believe the board will be concerned about your moral integrity when the company's reputation is tarnished? Investors will panic, and this empire you've built will crumble. Christian stood, his hands gripping the edge of the desk. Better that than letting you stay. I won't be complicit in this anymore. Russell's expression darkened. Then, prepare to burn with me. Ashley watched the exchange from the shadows. She had come to deliver documents but stopped short when she heard voices raised in Christian's office. Listening to the confrontation, her stomach churned. Russell's words echoed Stephen's sentiments. Christian wasn't innocent, not entirely. But there was something in Christian's tone, in the way he stood his ground, that struck her. He was willing to risk everything to make things right. As Russell stormed out of the office, their eyes briefly met. His gaze was sharp, calculating. She quickly looked away, stepping further into the shadows until he was gone. Later that evening, Ashley sat across from Stephen in a dimly lit cafe. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with suspicion. She had told him about Christian's confrontation with Russell, about the evidence he was compiling. "And you believe him?" Stephen asked, leaning forward. His voice was low but carried an edge that cut through the noise of the cafe. "I don't know," Ashley admitted. "But he's not backing down. He's risking everything to expose Russell." Stephen shook his head, his expression dark. It could all be a show, a way to cover his tracks. Ashley frowned. Why would he do that? He could have stayed quiet, letting things continue as they were. But he didn't. "Because he's protecting himself," Stephen insisted. "Think about it, Ashley. If Russell goes down, Christian can pin all the blame on him and walk away clean. Don't let him manipulate you." "Perhaps," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But what if he's telling the truth? What if he really didn't know?" Stephen leaned back, his jaw tightening. Even if he didn't, it doesn't absolve him of responsibility. He built the system that allowed Russell to thrive. He's as guilty as anyone. Ashley looked away, her thoughts tangled. For so long, she had been certain of Christian's guilt, but now she wasn't sure. Watching him stand up to Russell, seeing the weight of his decision, it didn't align with the man Stephen had described. Stephen's voice softened, but the intensity remained. "Don't forget why we're doing this. For Dad. For everything we lost. Don't let him fool you, Ashley." Her chest tightened, guilt clawing at her. She nodded, but her heart wasn't in it. The next morning, Christian called Ashley into his office. He looked exhausted, the weight of the past few days evident in his posture. "I need your help," he said, his voice steady but quieter than usual. Ashley blinked, taken aback. "With what?" "Compiling the final evidence," he said. "Russell's built a network of lies and deceit, and I need to make sure every piece is accounted for before I take this to the board." She hesitated. Helping him meant choosing a side, a choice she wasn't ready to make. However, as she observed the conviction in his eyes, she sensed a shift in her perspective. "I'll help," she said finally, her voice firm. Christian nodded, a faint smile of gratitude crossing his face. "Thank you, Ashley." That night, as Ashley sat alone in her apartment, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Stephen. "Don't forget what he took from us. Keep him accountable." She stared at the message, her heart heavy. The lines between right and wrong had blurred, and for the first time, she wasn't sure what side she was on. Suddenly, the knock at Ashley's apartment door came. She paused, mid-task, a cold sense of unease prickling at the back of her neck. She wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, she approached the door, peering through the peephole. Russell. Before she could react, the door was forced open, slamming against her shoulder and sending her stumbling back. Russell entered, his face twisted with anger. "You couldn't just stay out of it, could you?" he snarled, stepping toward her. Ashley's heart raced as she backed away, reaching for her phone on the counter. But Russell was faster. With a sharp movement, he grabbed a heavy vase and swung, knocking her unconscious. She crumpled to the floor, the phone slipping from her grasp. Stephen arrived at Ashley's apartment minutes later, having left her a tense voicemail earlier that she hadn't returned. Finding the door ajar and the room in disarray, his chest tightened with dread. "Ashley?" he called out, his voice echoing through the silent space. When there was no answer, he scanned the apartment and spotted her phone lying on the floor. Picking it up, he saw the missed call from him and a faint smudge of blood on the screen. His fists clenched. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath. Christian's phone buzzed just as he was reviewing the final pieces of evidence against Russell. He answered without looking, his focus still on the files. "Mr. Butler," Russell's voice came through, smug and venomous. "We need to talk." Christian stiffened, his attention snapping to the call. "What do you want? I have something of yours. Or rather, someone. If you want her back, you'll stop whatever crusade you're on against me." "Russell?" But Russell cut him off. "You're not in control here, Christian. Call off your little investigation, or Ashley will suffer the consequences." The line went dead. Christian felt a sudden chill. He immediately dialed Ashley's number, but it immediately went to voicemail. His next call was to security, demanding they track Russell's movements. But as his team mobilized, he found himself thinking about Ashley, not just as an employee or a victim of Russell's schemes, but as someone he had grown to care for deeply. Stephen barged into Christian's office minutes later, his expression stormy. "Who is holding Ashley?" he said without preamble. Christian didn't question Stephen's method of knowing. His expression conveyed it all. Instead, Christian stood, grabbing his coat. "Russell, we will find her. Now." Stephen's eyes narrowed. "You better not be part of this, Butler." Christian met his gaze, his voice sharp. "If I were, why would I risk everything to bring Russell down? This isn't the time for your suspicions, Stephen. We need to work together." Reluctantly, Stephen nodded. "Fine, but if you betray her, I'll deal with you myself." The location came through an hour later, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Christian and Stephen approached cautiously, the air heavy with tension. Inside, Ashley was tied to a chair, her head drooping forward. A fresh bruise marred her temple, and her breathing was shallow. Russell paced in front of her, his phone in hand. "You think Christian Butler is your savior?" Russell sneered, more to himself than to her. "He's nothing, just another G. Sheltony man playing the hero when it's convenient." Ashley stirred, lifting her head slightly. Despite the fear coursing through her, her voice was steady. "He's not like you." Russell scoffed, but before he could respond, the door burst open. Christian entered first, his presence commanding, followed by Stephen. Russell froze, his confidence wavering as he saw them. "You've gone too far, Russell," Christian said, his voice cold. This ends now." Russell reached for a weapon, an old pistol on a nearby table, but Stephen moved faster. With a well-aimed swing of a pipe he had grabbed from the ground, he disarmed Russell, sending the gun skidding across the floor. Christian rushed to Ashley, untying her bonds, as Stephen held Russell in place. "Are you okay?" Christian asked, his voice softer now. Ashley nodded weakly, her eyes locking onto his. "You came," she whispered. "Of course I did," he replied, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Russell, pinned against the wall by Stephen, sneered. "You think this changes anything? You'll burn with me, Christian. The board will never forgive you." Christian stood, his expression unreadable. "Maybe, but at least I'll know I did the right thing." Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Christian had called them on the way, ensuring there would be no escape for Russell. As Russell was led away in handcuffs, Ashley leaned against Christian, her strength slowly returning. Stephen stood nearby, watching silently. "You risked everything," Ashley said, her voice tinged with emotion. "I couldn't let him hurt you," Christian replied simply. Stephen approached, his expression guarded. "Maybe you're not the man I thought you were, Butler, but this doesn't erase everything." Christian nodded. "I don't expect it to, but I'm not done fighting to make it right." For the first time, Stephen didn't respond with anger. Instead, he simply nodded, a flicker of respect passing between them. In the days that followed, Russell's crimes were exposed in full. The board, though initially furious, came to respect Christian's decision to prioritize integrity over profits. The company's reputation wavered but ultimately began to recover. Ashley felt a sense of relief from the burden of her family's legacy. With Russell's arrest, the truth about Shelton Enterprises came to light, clearing her father's name. As she stood in Christian's office one evening, looking out at the city skyline, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. "Thank you," she said, turning to Christian. "For what?" he asked, genuinely curious. "For proving that not everyone in this world is out for themselves," she said. Christian smiled faintly. "Sometimes doing the right thing is the only thing worth doing." The days following Russell's arrest witnessed a flurry of transformations. Christian spent hours in meetings with the board, painstakingly explaining the depths of Russell's betrayal and his own failure to notice the cracks in his company's foundation. It was a hard fight, but his honesty and decisive actions earned him reluctant respect. The damage to the company's reputation was real, but the transparency Christian displayed marked the beginning of a slow recovery. Stephen, however, had not left the company's orbit. His sharp mind and determination, honed by years of survival after his family's downfall, had not gone unnoticed. During one of the company's most pivotal board meetings, Christian made an unexpected proposal. "I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations for a time," Christian announced to the stunned board members. "We need a fresh CEO to rebuild trust and guide the company into the future. I believe Stephen Shelton is the right person for the job." Gasps rippled around the room. Stephen, who had been sitting silently at the back, froze in shock. He glanced at Christian, his expression unreadable. "I've seen his intelligence, his vision, and his ability to act decisively under pressure," Christian continued. "This company needs someone who understands the consequences of its actions, not just the profits. Stephen has lived through what we've caused, and I believe he'll ensure we never make those mistakes again." The board was hesitant, but after hours of discussion and Christian's unwavering support, they agged Shelton. Stephen Shelton was appointed as the new CEO. Later that evening, Stephen and Christian found themselves alone in the executive suite, with the decision hanging between them. "You didn't have to do this," Stephen said, his tone clipped, but not unkind. "I don't trust you entirely. Not yet." Christian nodded. "I don't expect you to, But this company needs a leader who will hold it accountable. I believe you're that leader." Stephen studied him for a long moment, then extended his hand. "We'll see if you're right." Christian shook it firmly, a rare smile crossing his face. "I am." For Ashley, the resolution of Russell's crimes brought a peace she hadn't dared to hope for. Her father's name was cleared, the truth about Shelton Enterprises publicly acknowledged. But it was more than that. She felt lighter, free from the chains of bitterness and anger that had bound her for so long. She spent more time with Christian, their conversations no longer guarded. They shared quiet moments in the office, talking about their futures instead of their pasts. Slowly, something deeper began to grow between them. One evening, Christian invited Ashley to the park where they had walked together months ago, before the storm of revelations. The air was crisp, the golden light of sunset bathing the city in warmth. They strolled along the path, Ashley laughing softly at one of Christian's rare, dry jokes. As they reached a secluded spot by the lake, Christian stopped, turning to face her. His expression was serious, but there was a softness in his eyes that made her heart quicken. "Ashley," he began, his voice steady, "I've spent much of my life focused on success, on building something that I thought would make a difference. But meeting you've reminded me of what truly matters." She blinked, her breath catching as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I know we've both been through more than our share of struggles," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple but elegant ring. "But I also know that I don't want to face the future without you by my side. Will you marry me?" For a moment, Ashley was speechless. Then tears welled in her eyes, and she nodded, a radiant smile breaking across her face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Christian, I will." Their wedding was a quiet affair, held in the very park where Christian had proposed. Only close friends and family attended, including Stephen, who stood to the side with a faint but genuine smile as his sister and Christian exchanged vows. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful, a reflection of their journey from brokenness to healing. As they walked hand in hand down the aisle, Ashley looked up at Christian, her heart full of hope. "This is our new beginning," she said softly. He squeezed her hand gently, his gaze full of love. "And it's only the start." Together, they stepped forward, leaving the shadows of the past behind, ready to face a future of love, redemption, and shared dreams. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. Share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining.